All right, good evening. Daf Yomi for our week is sponsored by Shmuley and Miriam Fuchs, Le'ili Nishmas Shmuley's mother, Bailey Yentel Bas Elchanan Shalom. May her neshama have an aliyah, and we have this amazing program that is upcoming Wednesday, November the 12th at 7:30, right here in the Kahal Yereim based medrash, and it is a double here because first of all, if you've ever wanted to learn how to tie tzitzis and to learn about the mitzvahs of tzitzis and all the rules of tzitzis, this is your event because it's a hands-on experience, and also the tzitzis that we tie are going to be donated and sent to Eretz Yisrael for the chayalim who are in need of tzitzis. All those, there are many that are Baruch Hashem taking on mitzvahs of tzitzis for its protection and to the extra zchus. There should be a protection for them. So this is an event you don't want to miss because it's good for you, it's good for others. This is just all around good stuff. So
is there a bracha that you make on tying tzitzis?
There is no bracha. You will say l'shem mitzvahs tzitzis. There's no bracha, but you on because there's no mitzvah to make tzitzis, only to wear tzitzis. So we make our bracha when we wear them, but not when we make them. But I'm sure Rabbi Giskelson will give us all of the details.
Right.
We are at the Mishnah. Mem Hey Amud Beis. Dvarim she'ein chayav malei mishum pigol chayavin alei mishum noser. We had a list a couple of mishnahs ago of those things that you are not liable. You can't get pigol for. You can't do pigol for because they have to be, in order for it to be pigol, it has to be a davar sheyesh lo matirin, which means that something has to be done. Something is done that permits this item to be consumed. Mm-hmm. So there are those items that we had a list. For example, the kamitza, we had the lavona. All these things are not consumed. So these items, there's no pigol. Chayav and alei mishum nosar. Nevertheless, you can be chayav for consuming them beyond the right time, and mishum tamei. And also, if you consume them while you're tamei, you can also be, if you eat them betuma. Chutz min adam. The only one that is not liable for all of those things is blood. The blood itself, which we're going to see why. Rabbi Shimon mechayev b'davar shedarkan lechol, right? Rabbi Shimon says only if the thing really is an edible thing, right? So the meats, those kinds of things. However, aval ha'etzim v'halavona v'ktores, but things like the wood, or things like the lavona spice, or things like the spices, the incense.
What's the lavona spice?
That frankincense. Do not know exactly what it is, but I'm sure you'll Google it. I'm sure you're already on it. So, frankincense, not Frankenstein. We always either make that mistake, but no, frankincense. Ein chayavin alav mishum tuma. You are not chayav for those items because of tuma, says Rabbi Shimon, because they're not edible. Right. Says the Gemara, Tana Rabbanan Rabbis, Yachol lo yehu chayavin mishum tuma el al davar sheyesh lo matirin bein lo bein lemizbeach. So you might have thought that you shouldn't be chayav for tuma. Except for something that has matirin, just like we had learned by pigol, because there would be a logical conclusion. Ma pigol shehu bekvia ubeyedia achas velo hutra miklolo. When it comes to pigol, so you're liable for a korban chatos, which is the fixed offering, meaning that it's not the offering, it's not the korban chatos all of the yored. It's the fixed offering. And also, you only have to become aware of it one time. Meaning, that somebody who eats pigol b'shogeg, if he knows after he's eaten it, so now he's chayav chatos, right? He doesn't have to know beforehand, afterhand. Just he finds out about it afterwards. Yes.
This is busy. Frankincense is an aromatic resin from the boswellia tree.
There you go. Okay. So, thank you. Velo hutter miklolo, and also we said that there's no circumstance when pigol is mutter. It's always usher, right? So those are the rules. So ein chayavin alav ella al davar sheyesh lo matirin bein la'adam bein lemizbeach. You're only going to be liable if you are consuming, if it's an item that has a permitter in order for it to be consumed by a person or the mizbeach. So tuma is way less significant. Why? Shiba oliviore. Tuma is you're still gonna be liable for a korban the punishment for a korban of tuma, right? Is you're gonna bring the korban oliviored, right? It's not even a fixed korban. It depends on how much money you have. That's the korban that you're gonna bring. And ub'shtei yedios. Also, we learned by Tuma, you have to become aware of it beforehand, that you're tamei, and afterwards. We said if you didn't know beforehand, then you only found it afterwards, you wouldn't be chayev in those circumstances. This you have to know beforehand and afterwards. And also, v'hutra mikola, there's a circumstance where Tuma was permitted, right? We had a korban tzibur, that the majority of the community is tamei. We said that it's permitted, okay? So, eino din, so she eino chayev, for sure. You should say that Tuma, right, is even more lenient than pigul. And if pigul you're not liable under those circumstances, then for sure, tuma you shouldn't be liable under those circumstances. Unless it's something that has matirin. Talmud Lomar, in order to avoid that kal v'chomer and that conclusion, the pasuk says so. That's always the answer at the end of the day, because the pasuk says so. Asher heim makdishim li. Pasuk in Chav Beis, Parak Chav Beis, pasuk Beis, in Vayikra, the old V'yinazru mikadshe b'nei Yisrael pasuk that we had learned in many times, and it says Asher heim makdishim li, all of the things that are holy to me. Pasuk means that all of the things that are holy are involved in the prohibition of tuma. So therefore, it's not just the things that yeshul matirin. Okay, yochol miyad. So you might think that the pasuk, that the prohibition of eating kodesh is immediate. Right. In other words, that there's a prohibition of eating these items since they're kodesh. If you eat them, then you are in violation. Talmud Lomar, therefore, the pasuk says yikrav. The very next pasuk. And more aleim ledoros lechem. Say for all generations, kol ish asher yikrav mikol zarachem. Once your offering is brought close, then your tuma is upon it. Then you could be chayav kares. Meaning, once the korban is done and the item is permitted, then you're going to get the punishment of kares, right? Tuma is a problem, right? But it's only going to become a prohibited item once the korban is completed. Okay, so fine. So Amar Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar says the word yikrav. V'chiyesh nogeya shehu chayev. How can you might think that the pasuk just says that you are liable if you touch the kodshim when you are that you touch, if you are tahor in the if he is tameh and he touches the korban, he should be chayev kares. He says, but that can't be, says Rabbi Elazar. That's why you have to explain this pasuk. It can't mean that you're talking about when you touch the korban, when you touch the item, then you become chayav kares, because that never happens. There's never a chayav kares for just touching something. Elamat Talmud Lomar, what are you going to explain the pasuk yikrav? How does the pasuk mean yikrav? Behuchshar li karev hakosav medaber. The pasuk means when the item is permitted to be brought close, that's when you have a problem of tumah. Ha-ketzad, how does that mean? Yesh lo matirim, if it's an item that can become permitted by something else, like the meat, or the items that are burned on the Mizbeach, mishiyikrevu matirav. Then, at what point are you liable for eating the meat when you're tameh? Only once you've sprinkled the blood, right? If you eat the meat before that, not chayav kares. So, ein lo matir, but what about those items that don't have matirim? We said that in our Mishnah, that it's not only things that are yesh ba matir, everything is an isser of kodesh. So the answer is, misha yikdash bakli. The answer is, once it is put into a holy utensil and is consecrated as holy, then already there's a prohibition about consuming it when you're tameh. Okay, so therefore, if you're going to take the wood or something like that, so then you're going to take a bite out of it. So there's no matirin for that. You're going to be liable for eating tuma immediately as soon as it's put in the utensil. Okay, so fine. Ashkechan tuma. That tells us that the prohibition of tuma applies for these items. Okay, so that's our source. No sarminolan. Where do we know that the eating these items past their right time, right? Even for items that don't have a matir, how do we know those things? The answer is asi chilul mituma. The same. We did this yesterday where we learned tuma to nosar. We had the hekesh, and then we had a nosar to pigul hekesh as well. Gzera shava. So this gzera shava of chilul, that gzera shava tells us that all the rules that apply to tuma apply to nosar as well. So that's very nice. Except yesterday we learned there was also a Gzera Shava that continued from Nosar over to Pigel. So, V'leilev avon mi Pigel. Well, we know that Pigel, Davar Sheish Matirin, is not permitted. That we're not going to say. But if there's a Gzera Shava, couldn't this go this way? Pigel, it's not going to be prohibited unless it's a Davar Sheish Matirin. Tuma says it is Usr even if there's a Davar Sheish Matirin. So why are you learning from Tuma to Nosar? Why don't you learn from Pigel to Nosar? Why is that? So the answer is Mistabra mituma havalim. It makes more sense since there isn't really a reason to one over the. Just go by logic. Shekain gezel simin. The answer is there's three things that are similar between Tuma and Nosar. Number one, Tuma and Nosar is a prohibition on the body of the animal itself, right? Pigel is a thought, right? You didn't change the animal. Tuma, you did something to it. Nosar, you left it over. Pigel is a thought, so that's different. Second of all, Zrika. When it comes to Nosar and Tuma, the throwing of the blood isn't what causes it. That's not what causes the prohibition, right? Touching it with your tummy causes the tuma. With Nosar, leaving it over causes the tuma. When it comes to Pigel, you have to have a Zrika. When you complete the korban properly, that's what causes the Pigel. And third of all, Chilul, right? That the word Chilul, that's the Gzera Shava, right? That's the Gzera Shava. The word Chilul is written both by Tuma and Nosar, so therefore that's a connection. Yeah, but Adirabba, if that's the case, you're looking at ways that they're similar. Mi Pigel havole lemelaf. Nosar is way more similar to Pigel than it is to Tuma, in that Shekain, Hutar, Tzitz, Tahor, Bazman, and Karev. Number one, Hutar, it's permissible, meaning it's left over, right? When it comes to Nosar and Pigel, both of them, Husar, right, there's no such thing as it being permitted. That's what the Husar is. It's the permissible. Meaning, because Tuma, there's a circumstance when it becomes permitted. When there's the community, right, and most of the people are Tameh, and it's a Korban Tzibor, you can not worry about Tuma. There's never a circumstance where Nosar and Pigel become permitted. Number two, the Tzitz, right? The Tzitz, Nosar and Pigel, the Tzitz can't help you. Tuma, the Tzitz can help you. So Tuma is not similar. Next, Tahor, right? Pigel and Nosar are both Tahor. They're not. That's sort of a weird one because, right? Otherwise, you could say, I'm not exactly sure how to understand the one because Pigel and Nosar are also they're not Tameh, but you can also say Pigel and Tuma are both not Nosar, right? So I'm not exactly sure how that one works, but the answer is they're both Tahorim, right? They apply to items that are Tahor. And Bisman means that both Nosar and Pigel have a relationship with time, right? One is a thought about time, one is actually leaving it over time, and the other one is Yikrav, that only if the korban becomes ruined it's the korban itself that becomes ruined by Pigel and Nosar, whereas by Tuma, both the korban and the person bringing the korban have a problem with Tuma, right? Because the kohen can also become tameh. You can't have a kohen that becomes Nosar, kohen that becomes Pigel, right? So the honey nefishin, that means there's 5 things. 5 is bigger than 3. So Ella, so really that's not the proof. So Ella midatani, Levi. It's the way that Levi taught it. Levi taught the following brisa. On this pasuk that we said, Vayinazru mikadshei b'nei Yisrael, right? He says, Minayin she'af b'psul zman hakasim b'daber. How do we know that pasuk itself, that kadshim, it's written by Tuma? How do I know also that pasuk means to tell me that that this pasuk is also talking about that if you have an invalidation related to time, i.e. Nosar, this pasuk is also talking about Nosar. So Talmud Lomer, the pasuk says, V'lo yichalalu as shem kadshi asher heim makdishim. That's a change in the gear. So it's kadshi b'nei Yisrael in parentheses. We're going to change that to the actual pasuk, which says, "V'lo yechalu shem kadshi asher heim makdishim li." You will not profane the name of my holy objects that they consecrate to me. Ani Hashem, I am Hashem. B'shnei chilulim hakasim medaber. There's 2 words. It says yechalalu with 2 lamids. right? The word is chol, right? To profane. What is lechalel? 2 lamets. The answer is there's 2 things being profaned here. There's 2 averos here. So echad psul nosar. One is the invalidation of nosar, which we also find in the psukim. Also says lechalel, and plus psul of tuma. Also, the psul of tuma is also in the same category. So therefore, despite the fact, right, that we learn that both of these things, the nosar and the tuma, have the same rule, and that is that they don't have to be a davar sheyesh lo matirin in order to become, for the prohibition to be active. Okay, now the one exception to the rule that tuma and nosar don't apply to is dam. Chutz min adam, the Mishnah said. You're not, if you eat the blood, you're not going to be chai for nosar or tuma. So what is the reason for that? So Amar Ula, Amar Kra. Ula says, the pasuk says, Va'ani nisativ lachem, right? The pasuk in Vayikra says, Ki nefesh habasar badami, the soul of the meat is in the blood, or the soul of the animal is in the blood. Va'ani nisativ lachem al mizbeach lechaper al noshusim. I put it upon, gave it to you onto the mizbeach, to atone for your souls, because the blood will atone for the soul. So, what does it mean? It's lachem. The blood is yours. So the answer is shelachem yehe. The blood, right, will be the same prohibition, the same level of prohibition as blood of a korban, of an animal that belongs to you. That isn't a korban. So there's no me'ilah, right? So that tells me there's no me'ilah by blood. Fine, that's great. Debate Rabbi Yishmael Tana, and then Yeshiva Rabbi Yishmael they taught. So Amar Kro, the pasuk says, "V'anisna sativ lachem al mizbeach lechaper." That end part of that pasuk, I gave it to you lechaper nisativ v'lo lemeila. That means that the blood. What's the purpose of the blood? The blood purpose is to atone. Brings the atonement. It doesn't create me'ilah. That means that if somebody wanted to take the blood from a korban and he wanted to put it on his crops for fertilizer, that would not be a problem, because you're allowed to use the blood, not a problem of me'ilah. Okay, so now, Rabbi Yochanan says, Amar Kra, the pasuk says, right, also by this korbanos, ki adam hu benefesh yichaper, earlier part of the pasuk, that it says who? Who lifnei kapara kila'achar kapara. The blood remains the same. It says who, it says who. So who means that it is the same blood. The blood remains unchanged, whether it's before atonement or after atonement. Ma'achar kapara ein bo me'ilah, just like with all the cases, once the blood has been done, the blood service is done, there's no me'ilah, right? That's how you eat a shlamim, right? How can you eat the meat? The answer is you don't have to worry about using an item once the korban is done. So also, af lifnei kapara ein bo me'ilah, therefore blood is an exception, and even before you throw the blood there's no me'ilah prohibition. Okay, so now, Ema, so why do we say, let's discuss what Rabbi Yochanan just said. Rabbi Yochanan just said that it's the same before and after the blood is thrown, it has the same prohibition regarding me'ilah of prohibited use. So why did you decide that it isn't prohibited before, just like it isn't prohibited after? Go the other way. Liachar kapara lifnei kapara. Say the after is the same as before. Ma lifnei kapara yesh bo milah, lachar kapara yesh bo milah. Just like before there is milah, so there is milah afterwards. So the answer is in lecha davar shenasis mitzvaso molan bo. That's just impossible. There's no such thing as any item that the mitzvah is already completed and there's a prohibition of mi'ilah. There's a prohibition against using that item once the mitzvah is done, right? Velo. Really, there's nothing like that. I'll show you one. Very trumas hadeshen. What about the scooping of the ashes that's done? When the ashes are ashes of korbanos that are already burnt, right? And we take a scoop of them every morning, and we walk down the ramp, and we put it into this. Here we are. Let's see if we can have it's going to be not on this picture, because it's going to be on this side. There's going to be a little place between this little ramp and the big ramp. There's a little place that we would scoop and place the ashes every day. They would take some of the ashes off and bring to the Trumas Hadeshen, the cleaning off of the ashes. So this is that Trumas Hadeshen. Well, we're going to learn. The pasuk says you take a kometz of the ashes and you put it from the mizbeach and you put it on the east side of the ramp of the mizbeach, which is where I showed you, which is an isser, and it's aser b'hana, right? Even though the mitzvah is already done with that. So what do you mean there's no me'ilah for after something's done? The answer is Mishum Dahavi Trumas Hadeshin Ubigdei Kahuna Shnei Ksufim Abayin Kechad. There are two exceptions to the rule. Okay, the two things that once the mitzvah is done, you still have a prohibition that you can't use those items when they come to holy object. Are these ashes, and the other is the white garments of the Kohen Gadol that he uses on Yom Kippur. It says in the pasuk that once the Kohen Gadol completes his service, he takes these white garments and he puts them away forever. Can't use them forever. Now, the rule is that this is itchy, cold.
Is that one of the reasons why we're Kittel on Yom Kippur?
You had mentioned that it could be. I don't know that it was ever mentioned that we were supposed to wear white, right? There's a kittel, also a reminder of death, but the reminder of the big day kahuna, I'm not 100% sure, but it definitely could, right? Nothing wrong with being reminded of that. So we have a rule that when the Torah tells us something one time, so then that's the general rule. And you apply all cases that are similar to that circumstance, you apply that rule to it. The Torah never wastes words. So if the Torah tells us in another place that I would have already understood that to be the rule, tells me a second time, then the Torah is telling me that there is no rule. It's something that only applies to these two cases. So, therefore, when the Torah tells me one time that once the mitzvah is done, you can still commit me'ila, I would have thought, okay, something the mitzvah is done, I already commit me'ila. But then the Torah comes back and tells me by the garments of the Kohen Gadol that once that's done, you also can't use it. Well, now I know those are the only two times. Okay. So hanichal rabbanan da'amri vehinicham sham. So I am fine if you are going to go according to the opinion of the rabbis. They say, and you shall place the garments of the Kohen Gadol there, meaning melamed shetunim geniza. That tells me that the garments, once they are finished being used, they get put away forever. Ella Rabbi Dosa. What about Rabbi Dosa's opinion? Rabbi Dosa says, "Da'amar mutaros hein lekohen hedjot." These white garments, they were very fine. They were made very expensively. When we're in Maseches Yuma, when we get there, that they used to buy very expensive, and they were identical to the garments that the regular Kohen would wear during the rest of the year. He says a Kohen Gadol can never wear these again, but a regular Kohen could, right? Because they're just perfectly fine for a regular Kohen. Just don't use them for Yom Kippur again. So now there's no me'ila. How can you say there's me'ila? Another Kohen's wearing them. So the answer is Mishum, there's two other ones. Mishum Dahavi Trumas Hadeshin, the Egel Arufa. The answer is because there's the Trumas Hadeshin says you're not allowed to use that again. And then also the Egel Arufa. The Egel Arufa was the calf that we decapitated, or we broke its neck, when we had a murder case between two cities, and the closer city, the elders had to bring it. That animal can never be used, even though the service is completed. Those are two cases where afterwards you can't use it, and therefore those are the exceptions to the rule. Okay. Hanichel mandamar ein melamdin, elamai mandamar melamdin Michael Mamer. So that's very good, but this concept that there's only two, if there's two exceptions, there are two times it's an exception, that's not a universal principle. Some people hold of that, some people don't. Some people say you need a third one. So what are you going to explain? So the answer is, Trei Me'uti Ksiv. So there's two different times that the pasuk says, this is the exception. So by the Egla Arufa, it says Ksiv Ha'arufa. This is the rule by the Egla Ha'arufa. It doesn't say Egla Arufa, it says Egla Ha'arufa. The one that is decapitated, which means that it is an exception to the rule. The extra hay. The Hasam Ksiv V'Samo, and by the Trumas Hadeshin, it says you shall place it next to the Mizbeach. V'Samo, place it. When the Torah goes out of its way to say the one, and this is it, that means it's telling you it's only this one. It's only it. This has a special rule which is not applicable to other circumstances. So therefore, there's only two times that it happens, and the Torah specifies these are the two exceptions. Okay. Gemara wants to know. There are, in the pasuk, which we were quoting about the blood service, it says, "Ki nefesh habasar badamhi," the nefesh of the animal is in the blood. So there are three different words in that pasuk that are extra. Lachem, to you, right? That it's supposed to be, I gave it to you on the mizbeach. What does that mean? Anina sativa on the mizbeach. Just place it on the mizbeach. It doesn't have to say to you. Lechaper as an atonement. So that's an extra phrase. And who is also an extra phrase. So tlosa kroy bedam lamali. Why do I have these three different words, these extra words? They teach me three different laws. What are the three laws? Lemeute mi mi'ila minosar umituma. So the answer is, they are coming to tell me that the blood of the korban doesn't apply. Mi'ila, nosar, and tuma don't apply as prohibitions to dam. Even though they're kodshim, nevertheless, those three. Aval pigel lo tzarich kra. But of course, pigel doesn't need its own pasuk. We already know blood, pigel doesn't apply to blood. Why? Because it's not. We already learned in a Mishnah. Kol sheyesh lo matirin, it has to have a matirin. And blood isn't a matir because it is the matir, right? It is the item that permits the rest of the korban. Once you sprinkle the blood, you can now eat the rest of the korban. It's not something that gets permitted by something else being done. So, if there's something else that happens that now permits it, then it can become pigel. But dam gufei matir, dam is the thing. Dam is the thing you sprinkle and permits other things. Therefore, pigel doesn't apply to it. I don't need a special pasuk to tell me mi'ila, nosar, and tuma. I had better know that because I might have thought they're holy objects. Therefore, these rules apply to it. Therefore, the pasuk tells me not. Okay. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Yochanan says, Shlosha krisos b'shlamim lama. Why is it that it says that there's a punishment of kares? Why is there a punishment of kares when you eat the meat of a shlamim and you're tameh? It says it three times. Pasuk in Vayikra Chaf Beis Gimel, it says, say to them, for all generations, any person who comes close from all of your children to the holy objects, asher yakdish Israel, that the Jewish people consecrate, Hashem, v'tuma so alav, and his tuma is upon him, he's going to get kares. That's number one. Number two, same Vayikra, Parak Zayin Pasuk Chaf. V'nefesh tochal bazar mizevach Hashem shel Hashem v'tuma so alav v'nichus nefesh me'amel. A person who eats from the meat of a zevach shlamim, his tumah is upon him, he gets kares. Third time, okay, the very next pasuk. V'nefesh ki sigabechol tamei b'tumas adam o behema tmeya. A person who touches something that is tamei or something that is tumas behema. O b'chol sheketz tamei, or touches a creepy crawly creature which is tamei. Ve'acham b'bsar zevach hashlamim ashel Hashem, and then he consumes a tahor korban. V'nichsar nefesh me'amel, then you get kares. So he wants to know, why do you have to have three different psukim to tell me that tuma and shlamim don't go together? We get it after the first time, right? So the answer is achas liklal va'achas liprat. So the first two is to tell us.
Maybe no one's already. But what's the Indian opposite and how does it have to do with
that kares applies to a shlamim, which we would then presume to mean that it applies to all korbanos, right? Shlamim is an example of a korban, right? It says that kol isha shir yikrabi kol zarachem as kodshim v'tumas olav. Shlamim is included in that rule because it says all of the kodshim you get tuma. That's the klal, right? Then the Torah comes along and the shlamim was already included. So then the pasuk comes along and removes shlamim from the general rule by specifying later that the shlamim specifically, if you are eating from the basar of the shlamim and you're tamei, then you get kares. Okay, so that means that it teaches us that just like the second time is talking only about the shlamim, so too the first pasuk is talking about korbanos like in circumstances that are similar to the shlamim. So, for example, those items that are kodesh, those things that are donated to the Beis Hamikdash that are kodesh as a korban, doesn't apply to items that are donated to the Beis Hamikdash for the physical upkeep, right? If you donate kedushas damim, there's no problem of tuma of consuming it while you're tamei, right? So, only applies to korbanos. How do we know that? Because again, it talks about korbanos first, then it talks about the shlamim. So we know that the korbanos that is talking about, the things that you're bringing to the Beis Hamikdash, are things like a shlamim, right? and therefore it basically works like a klal prat. Only things that are like a shlamim are going to be in violation that you get kares for, and that's item number. That's why it's written the first time and the second time. The third time, to tell me that it even applies to things that are not edible. Tumah applies to things that are not edible, right? For example, wood, the levona, ketoras. Those were the items that if you eat them when you are tameh, you could be chayav kares as well. Now, Rabbi Shimon Damar, Devarim she'ein nechalim ein chayav mishum tuma lasugei mai. Now, the question to be, what does Rabbi Shimon do with that? Because Rabbi Shimon in our Mishnah said, if they're not edible, then you're not chayav. So the third pasuk, if you're telling me the third pasuk, tell me that you are liable because even if you consume something that's not edible, Rabbi Shimon says that's not true. What does he do with it? So he does that. He uses that third pasuk as for lasuye chatos hapnimios. He says that it's talking about the internal korbanos, that you can also be chayev for eating the inside korbanos, right? The ones that we talked about, you sprinkle the blood on the inner mizbeach, you consume those while you're tamei, you're also chayev kares. Kasal kadaita chamina, I would have thought to have said, Hovam Rabbi Shimon, kol she'ino ala mizbeach hachitzon kishlamim, ein chayav mishum pigol, since Rabbi Shimon had said that he compared pigol, the rule was that if it doesn't, that pigol, the source was shlamim, so therefore, shlamim, only those korbanos that are similar to shlamim in that they're brought on the outer korban, only are applicable to pigol. He excluded the inner korbanos from pigol. Well, now we're comparing shlamim again, using to make tuma. So maybe he'd be consistent and say that as his consistency, right? The korbanos that are similar to shlamim exclude the inner korbanos because those are not similar to shlamim. So therefore, mishum tami nami loichin wouldn't be chayav for tuma kamash malon. Therefore, the pasuk has to tell me, third pasuk comes to tell me that even the ones that are inside, right? Of course, then the other rabbanan don't need that pasuk for that because they say that the inner korbanos are similar to a shlamim and that they're korbanos, and then they're going to include the things that are not edible, and that's their source for their dispute. Okay, Nomi Rabbi Shimon mechayev esher garkol. Nomi Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon says, it's a strange word, Nomi, but Rabbi Shimon says that those things that are edible, right? Only those things that are edible are chayav for tuma. Okay.
Another thing we're going to see,
Itmar. So it was said in the base medrash. Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish argued. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina, and also Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Chanina argued on the following item: Chad me hazuza v'chad me haizuza. One person from this pair and one person from the other pair, right? We weren't sure who was which, who argued with whom. But Chad Amar, one of them says, Machlokes betumas basar. The argument between the Chachamim and Rabbi Shimon is talking about when we're talking about the tuma is upon the object, right? If the object is tameh and you are tahor, if you are tahor and you eat the tameh wood levona, that's where the Chachamim say, you're chayev, and Rabbi Shimon says, you're not. Aval betumas haguf, but if the person is tamei and the item is still tar, l'divrei kol ein aloka, then that's for sure. Everyone agrees that you wouldn't get malchus for that.
If you're tamei just with that tar, would you make that tamei on tongue?
It will make it, but we're talking about eating it in order to become chayav kares. The Chadamar and the other one disagrees. He says, "Kamachlokas bazu, kach machlokas bazu." It's not true. They're arguing in both cases. They're arguing over whether you're tamei or whether the object's tamei. You could be chayiv either way. They're arguing in both cases. My taima. What is the reason why the Chachamim would say you're tamei by tumas aguf, right? Even for those items that are not edible, because kevan de karina bay vehabasar asher yiga bechol tamei. Karina Bay Vetumaso Alav, because we have described that items that are not edible, right? It says that the basar asher yiga b'chol tamei, the meat that touches anything that is tamei. So we've already explained. Right? If you're going to tell me that in one pasuk, the basar, from this extra phrase we had learned this extra phrase, but the extra kares, we're going to talk about that means inedible things. The meat means inedible things. Well, if you're going to say the word basar means inedible things, in Parak Zion pasuk Yud Tes, which is talking about where the item is tamei, then you have to go to the next pasuk. That was the pasuk that's talking about where the person is tamei, and it also talks about meat. You can't change in the middle. If meat means something that's inedible in this pasuk, because it's the third time it's being mentioned, right? Then in the next pasuk, meat means also something inedible. So therefore, it's all a matter, this argument between Rabbi Shimon and the Chachamim is whether you're going to interpret the word basar as inedible things, right? Once you say the word basar means inedible things, then it means it in both psukim and in both circumstances. So therefore, the argument would be in both cases. Okay. So now, the other opinion would say no, it only applies to the pasuk that is the actual pasuk it's talking about. Rav Tavyumi Masni Hacha. Rav Tavyumi had a different version of this argument. And he says the version of this argument is Rav Kahana Masni Hachi. That was Rav Tavyumi's version of the argument. Rav Kahana's version of the argument was like this: Chad mei hai zuzah v'chad mei hai zuzah. Take one of this group and one of this group. And a seifa, they're arguing about the end part of the Mishnah. Chad amar machlokes betumas haguf. One says the argument is in the circumstance where the person is tamei, right? Remember, before we said everyone agrees when it comes to the person's tamei. He says no. The argument is when the person is tamei and the item is tahor. But aval betumas basar l'divrei akol loke. But if it was tumas basar, if the item itself was tamei, everyone would agree that you get malchus. The other one says no. An argument in both. Amar Rava. Rava says mistabra kiman damar machlokas bazu kach machlokas bazu. Actually makes good sense to say the argument is in both cases. My taima. What is the reason? Because kaven de lo karina bay vetuma so alav v'nichrasa lo karinan bay v'abasar asher yiga b'chol tamei lo yei achel. If you're going to tell me that the word basar doesn't mean inedible objects in the first pasuk, why would you tell me that it means it in the other pasuk? Be consistent between the two. V'ha amar mar. The Gemara says, but didn't we learn that the word v'ha basar l'rabos itzim levona, that the word basar is coming to tell me that is including wood, and it's including the levona. So how can Rabbi Shimon say, right, that this drasha is not mechayev dvarim that are not ru'ya lechila? If we're clearly saying that's the drash, so the answer is lipsula bi'alma. The answer is all he's trying to say is that tuma applies to it in that it invalidates it from being a korban, but it doesn't apply to it in the sense of making it a prohibition to consume. Next Mishnah. L'shem shisha dvarim hazevach nizbach. There are 6 things you have to have in mind. Remember, we quoted this right when we got started, right? 6 things. We finally got to Memvav. 6 things you have to have in mind when you bring a korban. Number 1, l'shem zevach. You have to know which korban it is. Second of all, l'shem zovech. You have to know who it's for. Number 3, l'shem Hashem. You have to know that you're bringing it for Hashem. L'shem Eishim. You have to know that you're bringing it so that you're going to burn parts of it on the Mizbeach. Number 5, l'shem Reach. That is supposed to go up as a pleasant smell in this Mizbeach. L'shem Nichoach. That it have to be pleasant to Hashem. Okay? And when it comes to Chatas v'Asham, when it comes to the Korban Chatas v'Asham, l'shem Chet, you have to know which Aveira it's coming for. That's what you got to have in mind when you bring a Korban. Okay? We had discussed 2 of them before, right? Now we have the rest. Now, keep in mind that if you don't, clearly from the Mishnah at the beginning, these are not going to invalidate it, right? We discussed what happens if you don't have the right. It's not, if you have the wrong Chet, it's not going to atone for you, right? But it doesn't invalidate the korban. And we have these other circumstances where we have similar. Amar Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi says, Af mishulo haya belibo l'shem echad mikol elu kosher. Rabbi Yossi says, if you didn't think about it at all, it's still kosher. Right? You didn't have in mind. You didn't say you didn't have a whole declaration at the beginning. This korban is hereby a shlamim for the sake of so and so ben so and so, and you just stay quiet and you're fine. Why? Because shu t'nai basin. That's what basin said to do. Basin said, keep the Kohen from talking, right? He can only mess things up. If he starts talking and he says the wrong korban and the wrong person, he ruins the korban. If he stays quiet, he can't possibly mess it up.
What is the difference with the Kohen to keep him from talking?
It is not. It is safety. Okay? Safety. Kohen's going to mess it up if he starts talking about it. She'eina hamachshava holechas ela achar oved. Right? And so we're going to say that the thought goes by the person who's bringing the korban. Right? So therefore, it doesn't matter what the person who's bringing the korban is saying. It's the Kohen who's doing the korban who can make it into mi'ila or ruin the korban. Right? So
it's
yes.
certainly preferred if they had all these 6 things in mind. But if they didn't, it's still okay.
Well, it depends which ones, right? We learned some of them actually can invalidate a korban.
Right.
Some of them will be okay. The korban's still valid, but it doesn't count for this guy.
Right.
Right. Some of them are just lechatchila. Okay. So now, Amar Rav.
It's a declaration that the coin is making, right? It's not like just thinking.
We had discussed whether these things, in order to be invalid, we have to say them out loud. This Mishnah seems to certainly imply you got to say it out loud, because by keeping the Kohen quiet, we avoid problems. Well, if you're keeping him quiet, but he's still thinking the wrong thoughts, if that's a problem, it's still a problem. Keeping him quiet doesn't really solve anything, right? So it has to be that you only can create. It sounds like you can only create me'ilah or any of these kinds of, pigel or any of those kinds of thoughts if you say them out loud. It certainly seems that way. It's a discussion in the Rishonim. So let's at least keep it simple and say, yes, you got to say the wrong intent out loud to ruin it. Stam, we had learned this from the beginning in the first parak. Stam, if you say nothing, it doesn't ruin it. Okay. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Rabbi says name of Rav. Ola l'shem Ola, right? So the source of this din in our Mishnah that it says is the what it says by the parsha of Ola. The Vayikra starts off very first korban that it talks about. Vayikra's korban Ola. It says V'ktira kol eines hakol hamizbecha. You're going to burn the kohen is going to burn all of it on the mizbeach. Ola as a korban Ola. Ishay reach nichoach Hashem. It is a Ola, which is a pleasant fire, which is a pleasant smell to Hashem. Each of those words, it's an Ola, pleasant fire to Hashem, tells me all the things that you have to have in mind. First, Ola. What is it? That means l'shem Oli. First thing you have to know is it's an Ola. You have to know what korban it is. That's number one. Lafuki l'shem shlamim, which means don't think it's a shlamim, right? Dilo. If you do that, that's wrong. Ishay, you're supposed to bring it as a fire. L'shem ishim, you're supposed to bring it knowing that it's going to be burnt on the mizbeach. Lafuki kevava dilo, right? Which comes to exclude, right? The guy thinks, you know what, I'm going to roast this. No, you're not. You're putting it on the fire in the mizbeach. So that's also a wrong thought. Reyach, as a smell, that means l'shem reyach. It's supposed to be brought as a smell on the mizbeach. Lafuke ivarim shetzol on vehe'elon delo, which means you can't roast the limbs first and then burn them on the mizbeach. The smell of the cooking meat has to be done on the mizbeach. Don't pre-cook them, right? That's what it's telling me. Damar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Rav Yehuda says the name of Rav. Ivarim shetzol on vehe'elon ein bahem mishum reyach. If you have roasted the meat and then you bring it onto the mizbeach, then you have not fulfilled the requirement of reyach. Nichoach, what does nichoach mean? L'shem hanachas ruach. It has to be for pleasantness between you and Hashem. Right? That you basically want to create a close connection with Hashem. And la Hashem, to Hashem, l'shem misha amar v'hayolam. You have to have in mind, it's for the one who spoke and created the world. Okay. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. You said Rav chatos sheshchata l'shem ola psula. If you have a chatos and you shecht it for an ola, that is pasul. L'shem chulin kshera. But we learned that if he has in mind that it's chulin, that it's not a korban at all, that's not going to invalidate it, right? We had that whole conversation that the worse the intent is, the less worse it is a little bit, right? Because it's such a wacky intent that it's irrelevant.
There's the whole argument about what's better.
Yes.
That crazy argument.
That was whether it's better to be closer, similar, or less similar.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Amar Rabbi Elazar, right? I'm glad we remember all these things. Amar Rabbi Elazar, what is Rabbi Elazar says, my time at Rav. Why does Rav say that? Because the pasuk says, V'lo yechalu es kodshei b'nei Yisrael, right? You shall not desecrate the holy objects of Bnei Yisrael. Kodshim mechalin kodshim, vein chulin mechalin kodshim. An improper thought of another korban will invalidate it, but not an improper thought relating to a non-korban. Meisif Rabba asked the following question. Rabbi Yossi says, Af mi shelo haya beliba l'shem echad mikol elu kosher shu t'nai beistin. Right? That we learned in the Mishnah that Rabbi Yossi says, if somebody doesn't think anything, it's still kosher, because if he doesn't say anything, because it's a t'nai of beistin. So taima shelo haya beliba klal, which means that he doesn't say anything. Haya belibo l'shem chulin pasul, which means that if he said it was chulin, it should be pasul. That's what the Mishnah seems to imply. Don't say anything. So Amar le Abai says Dilma lo haya klal kosher umeratze. What it means is if he doesn't say anything, the korban is kosher and it is effective. The answer is that if he has in mind that it's for chulin, remember we said, if you have in mind a wrong korban, it's going to invalidate the korban at all, you can't bring it at all. Maybe if you have l'shem chulin, the korban is still acceptable, but the person who's bringing it needs to bring a repeat korban. It doesn't help him. So that's what's going on there. Okay, Amar Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar says, Chatos sheshacht l'shem chulin kshera. Rabbi Elazar says that a chatos that is shechted for the sake of chulin is kosher, mishum chulin psula, but if he does it for the sake of chulin, but if he does it because he thinks it's chulin, right, then it's pasul. Thinking again, if, right, he does it l'shem chulin, I am going to take this korban, chatos, and I am going to shecht it as chulin. That's meaningless. However, if somebody says, here's my cow, and despite the fact that he's standing in the middle of the Beis Hamikdash, he forgets where he is, he's tired, whatever, and he shechts it, he goes, great, let's have lunch, and he shechts it. That invalidates the korban, right? Because now he's actually doing it as chulin. Kidabai mine Shmuel miravuna. And that, the explanation of this is like what Shmuel asked Rav Huna the following question. How do you know if you're misasek? Misasek means that you had intent to be to doing one thing and you do something else, right? Unintentionally, right? You were intending to shecht the animal, but you're doing a shechita of chulin, not a shechita of korbanos. So how do I know that invalidates? So Shenemar, the pasuk says, "V'shachad es ben abakar l'fnei Hashem." You have to shecht the animal before Hashem. Ad shtei shchita l'shem ben bakar. So it means that the shchita has to be for the sake of a shchita, right? So that means Amar lei. So he said to him, "Zubiyadenu hi la'ake zubiyadenu hi." He says, "We already know this, right? La'akev minayin, but." That only tells us that you're supposed to have a mitzvah. You're supposed to shecht it before Hashem. It doesn't tell us that it is invalid if you don't. So Amar le liratzоnchem tizbachuhu. The pasuk says that it shall be for your desire you shall bring it. Lidatchem zivchu. That with your knowledge you have to bring it as a korban, right? So therefore, if you have kavana just for shchita, you have to have kavana for shchita, not misasik. Now this is where this is a little bit tricky, because Rashi talks about this misasik concept. He says, imagine somebody is just throwing knives and he accidentally throws the knife and it does shchita, kosher shchita that way. That's what we're talking about as misasik. But before, we were talking about, you thought it was for chulin, right? So the idea here is that if you are completely misasik, right, you have to have, if you are thinking that it is just, you're throwing your knives, that might not be a kosher shchita. Versus where we had in mind specifically that I was doing it as chulin, that may invalidate it as a korban.
You're saying Rashi is problematic because
he switches, right? He switches the definition of misasek, right? Rashi says the first Rashi is misasek kashem shochi kodshim velo bekavana ella kemisasek b'dvar machirim. He's not having in mind. He's thinking about doing other things, right? That's what's going on here.
Why can't you say that's analogous to shecht and chulin and Beis Hamikdash, which is a total.
I guess so. I don't know why it bothers me so much. It's like, seems like it's different, that you're doing something completely different, and you do shchita. Sounds like it's way worse than, I'm intending to do shchita, but it's not the right kind of shchita. Okay. Next, to finish off, to get to the Mishnah, hopefully, She'ena machshava, to get to the end of the parak. She'ena machshava holechas ela achar ha'oved. The thought goes after the person who's bringing the korban. Masnisin deloki aitana. Our Mishnah is not like the following opinion that Detanya we're going to so Amar Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yossi says Shemati shebalim mefaglin. I heard that the owners can create pigul, despite the fact that they're not the ones doing the avoda. Right? If the owner of the korban thinks, I'm going to eat this beyond the right time, that can make it pigul, even if the Kohen has all the right intentions. So that seems like our Mishnah doesn't agree with that. Amar Rava, my time the Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yossi. Why does Rabbi Yossi say that the owners can? Damar Kar, the pasuk says, V'hikriv hamakriv, that he shall bring close the one who brings the korban close. So that means the one who's bringing close, he also, the makriv, lo yichashiv, the makriv cannot have in bad thoughts. So Amar Rabbi says, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Kulu Svira Lahu, Mechashiv Zeh Mechashiv Zeh Oved Hevya Machshava. There's a whole list of people who hold that Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, all of them hold that if one person's thinking something and another person does an action, one person's thought can make it so the other person is doing the wrong thing. Right? Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yossi had Amran. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yossi, as we just explained, one guy is standing on the side going, I'm going to make this pigul, and the Kohen brings it and it becomes pigul. Okay, so that's his intention changes things. Rabbi Eliezer, what's Rabbi Eliezer's case? Tonight we learned in Mishnah. Hashochet laovei kochavim. If somebody's doing shchita for a non-Jew, a idol-worshipping non-Jew, shchita so kshira, his shchita is kosher. Why? Because what's wrong with my shchita? My shchita is kosher. So what? It's the non-Jew's animal. He wants to have lunch. I shechted it. Now it's kosher. Rabbi Eliezer, posel, Rabbi Eliezer says, no, it's possible. Why? Because the non-Jew is mistami shechting it for the sake of idolatry, but I'm doing the shechita. The answer is his thought ruins my action. Right? So that's the thought. Again, so that's the next one. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, so he holds Ditanya in a brisa. Kalam Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, this is the rule, but Shimon ben Elazar says, Kol she'ein kosher lehatzniya, ein matzniyan kamohu. Huchsher v'hitzniya uba'acher v'hiotzio nischayev zeh b'machshava shel zeh. What happens like this? When it comes to carrying on Shabbos, if you're at home and it's dark, it is dark here. When it comes to carrying on Shabbos, there's a rule about how much of something is relevant, right? If I carry a piece of dust, it's not carrying. I have to have a significant enough item. So if I have an item where there's a significant quantity is a certain amount, and I don't have that significant quantity, and I walk outside, it's not carrying me doraisa. Fine, from a Torah perspective. What if there's one guy, he collects this stuff, whatever this small amount, he collects old pennies or whatever it is. So he collects old stuff, and he's got something that nobody else considers important, but to him it's important, and another guy carries it. The fact that he thinks it's valuable and important means that this guy's Machal Shabbos for carrying it. Okay, so one guy's thought changes what the other guy does. That's their. Not everybody agrees with him, right? But that's their three opinion. Okay, now.
You said that's not the majority?
No, majority don't hold that way, right?
What is the relationship between those two people?
Both Jewish. I suppose, yeah. No, that's it.
Not like I'm carrying it on your behalf.
It does not seem so, right? But it has to be that these items were specifically his intent to keep, right? This guy collects Q-tips, right? And I'm carrying a Q-tip, right? Maybe a Q-tip is valuable. I don't know. It has to be something that's small that's not valuable. I don't know.
Yeah,
some dust or whatever. Dust, lint collection, correct? Right? So if I can't just say, well, this is lint, and I know that guy collects lint, so therefore I'm chayav. No, he has to have said, this is important to me. I'm keeping this. You can't carry his thing. Now you're carrying.
So it'll have to be something that the majority of people find to be valuable.
In order to be carrying on Shabbos, correct? Generally speaking, yes. So Tarvaihu Islahu Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yossi. Now, Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, they agree what Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yossi says. Why? Because Hashta Bachutz Amrin. They have cases of Shabbos. They have a case of what was the second one? The case of the shechting the idol worshipping animal. They hold that thought can change, okay? So bifnim, mi boy, when it comes to karbanos are very often affected by thought. So that makes sense. If we are going to say that in other cases thought changes things, then for sure you're going to agree when thought changes something by karbanos. Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yossi leis lahu the tarvayu, but Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yossi won't agree with the other ones. Why? Because dilma bifnim hu da'amrinan, he says, this is thought, it applies to a Beis HaMikdash. Bechutz lo amrinan, we don't say that it applies, that thought change applies to other halachos, so he's not going to agree with them. Rabbi Shimon Elazar says, as far as the hiding, Islay Rabbi Elazar, he's going to agree about the shechting of the animal. Why? Because Hashta b'Shabbos amrinan ba'avodas kochavim mibai. When it comes to Shabbos, usually when it comes to Shabbos, we need something called meleches machsheves. Meleches machsheves means there's a specific type of activity which you'd be liable for, that one person's version of that activity changes what is a reasonable activity. That's a little unusual. But if he says that even in the extreme unusual case of Shabbos it applies, then for sure it applies to shechting an animal as well. And Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shimon Elazar, but Rabbi Eliezer is not going to agree right, with Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar about Shabbos, because Dilma Bavos Kachavnu Damrina. Maybe he thinks that this is true when you're shechting an idol worshiper's animal, Ke'ein Bifnim. That's already similar to the holy. There's already like thought. It makes some sense by it's like similar to korbanos. Aval Shabbos, but Shabbos. The Torah makes it very clear that it has to be a specific type of standard malacha, and this is not that standard malacha. So therefore, he doesn't agree, and so they all don't hold from each other. Hadronach Beishamai, Hadronach Beishamai, Hadronach Beishamai. That completes the
Fourth parak.
the fourth parak, right? Next parak is very special. Next parak is very special.
What makes it special?
So if we have a minute while we're getting everybody together, before we turn it off, there's a couple of things that make this next parak very special to save us some time for tomorrow. Number one, this is the parak that we recite in davening every morning. Ezehu Mekoman is in Korbanos that we recite in davening every morning. This parak is very unusual because the only parak in all of Shas of Mishnayos that does not have one argument in the entire thing. There's no disagreements. Okay? So, being that there's no agreement, the question is why? Why do we recite it as Korbanos in the morning, right? And that's potentially one of the reasons why we're going to learn some Mishnayos when we start off. Good to be able to have nice Mishnayos when nobody's arguing, nobody disagrees, right?
Meaning it's so accepted that that's the halacha.
Yes.
Right, so it's like a pure form of.
Very pure.
Yeah.
Now, this also, as we're going to go see through these Mishnayos, there is a question, did Rabbi Yehuda Nasi write Mishnayos, or is he a compiler of Mishnayos? If you're of the opinion he's a compiler of Mishnayos, when there's no argument, he is basically having a tradition that is unbroken, handed down generations, dating all the way back. There is a Mishnah in this parak that talks about eating korbanos inside the kilayim. Kilayim means you have to eat it inside the curtains. Now, there are no curtains in the Beis HaMikdash. There are only curtains in the Mishkan. Says some Meforshim that why do they call it the curtains? Because these Mishnayos are actually handed all the way down from the days of Moshe Rabbeinu, and that these Mishnayos are authentic in their original text. So this Mishnah, this parak is very, very unique. So we will learn this Mishnah.
Not to be missed.
Not to miss.